Yes, so this is just going to be in person, I believe, this Q&A. Yeah, we've got no audience out there in the ether. So it's just you guys here, and so you just fire your questions directly at me, at Michael, and we'll do our best to answer them. But I'll start by how should we start, Michael? I just feel as if there's so many ways we can get into this. I mean, we can get into it from a technical point of view, because there's so many things I know I would like to know, and I'm sure the audience would like to know about it from a technical point of view. But I feel a good place to start would be how did you end up in Lubiana, in Slovenia to begin with? And you know, I know you like walking. I know you're a walker. We know each other, and so I know that you like walking. So you go on walks when you go to places. So you in Lubiana, you took a walk, and cinema. So walking and cinema put together makes this film, I guess.
Yeah, it's a good place to start, because like most places, I discovered it Ljubljana by attending a film festival there. Ljubljana International Film Festival in November 2014, and then returned, I guess, again and again and again by attending different film festivals in Slovenia, not just Ljubljana. And I guess I attended those festivals in the context of a freelance film critic, and then later as a curator, programmer, educator. And freelance as a context is important, because I feel like the unceasing, unrelenting demands of freelance labor condition you into constant mode of production, where you're always saying yes to everything, where you're sort of dancing figuratively to the demands of around the clock, always on need to produce labor. So my way of kind of, and it's a competitive field, freelance work. So my way of simultaneously distinguishing myself among peers and colleagues, as well as sort of liberating myself from that temporality, if you like, that mode of production, was to walk, and to walk long distances, and to set time aside consciously and deliberately to get away from that kind of life, or the hub, if you like. And so this walk in Ljubljana is a 34-kilometer circumference of the city that marks the garrison that the Italian and then later German armies demarcated the city when they occupied former Yugoslavia. And you know, on this route was 108 bunkers and fortifications and barbed wire to prevent the urban dwelling anti-fascist partisans from communicating with the rural dwelling anti-fascist partisans. And then obviously in 1945, that was all decommissioned and Yugoslavia was freed. And then in the 80s, Vlasto Kopac, an architect, designed at each location of the former bunkers an octagonal, more or less identical stone pillar to commemorate the route. And it's now today parkland that is used mostly for recreation. I'll stop there because I'm aware that there's other questions to come.
Well, I mean, that's, you know, beginning to take us into you know, the process of making the film, and the you know, all the elements that go into it. Okay, so first of all, did you shoot everything on one walk? Was it all one walk, or did you make several trips? I mean, it's the magic of cinema, and there's so much about the film that, you know, enfolds magic in it. Was it just one walk where you shot everything, or multiple walks?
So the walk is achievable, obviously, in a single day. It's 34 kilometers, 38 because it takes 2 kilometers to reach the circumference, depending on where you are in the city. And I often was staying in a place where it's the shortest route to the walk is 2 kilometers. I say kilometers as if, you know, I don't speak in miles, but
Well, you shot it in Europe, so
Yeah, exactly.
let's keep to Europe.
So no is the answer to your question, and the reason why is because the kit and filming equipment, and more than that, actually, the storage capacity for shooting on 4K. So I shot in 4K as opposed to high def because I knew that I would be manipulating the image, and I didn't want to lose resolution when the inevitable cinema screening came. So I was very hopeful of a screening in this context, and I didn't want to lose any resolution, so I had to shoot on 4K, which necessitates certain storage capacities and memory cards, and I was limited with regard to how much footage I could shoot in a single day. And in addition to that, a walk becomes a trudge because you're walking with a tripod and a lot of kit and everything else. So we shot over 3 consecutive days. And the reason that they were consecutive is because there was a thunderstorm happening on the 4th day, and I wanted to sort of minimize the variables in terms of weather, as well as not get drenched in a context where the camera wasn't mine.
And also light, of course, because it's. I mean, I suppose I don't know how fast you walk, but as you say, a 34 or 38 kilometer walk is achievable within daylight hours. But if you're stopping at every marker to set up the camera to shoot, and then fold up the kit and then go on again, it becomes very long.
Very good point. Yeah. So I walk about 3 miles an hour, and I guess after the 10-mile mark, you add a sort of 5 minutes onto each mile after that because of the exponential effect physically. I shot it in autumn consciously because I knew that a lot of the images, particularly early on, were forest-based, and I felt that in shooting it in autumn, there's something particularly suitable to this kind of film because although the trees are quite densely packed, the fact that the leaves are now on the ground means that the backgrounds can reveal themselves a lot more. But yeah, light was a factor, sure.
Again, there's so many technical questions that that one could ask, and I want to leave some to the audience. One question that did occur to me was there ever any moment when the image was not dissolving?
Yeah, I think the first minute and a half or so is prior to dissolve. After that, there is always at least 3 images on screen. And I feel like watching it back now, I forgot about the train, which I feel like is the climax of the film narratively and rhythmically. And I was so tempted to actually stop the dissolves at that point, because that was coincidence. You construct a structure by walking, and I kind of edited the film before I shot it in a way because the walk is just a structuring device. I knew I wanted to capture distance and time in that way. But then you set these rules for yourself, and then happenstances such as that train coming along just as I was beginning to shoot up the camera. And I was going to shoot that scene regardless of whether or not a train came. But then the train, was so long, so cinematic, that I felt compelled to keep filming. And then when it came to the edit, I may or may not have lengthened the dissolve, let's say, just to make sure that the length of the train kind of coded the length of the dissolve.
It's interesting you mentioned the train, because the first time I watched the film, this is the second time I'm seeing it, and the first time on the big screen. The first time I watched it, it didn't really make that much of an impression on me, but watching it on the big screen, it really hit me, and it made me think, I have to say, of trains going to the concentration camps. That's what I thought of, when I was watching that. It was pretty powerful. Again, so many technical questions, but what I will ask before turning over to the audience, because we have one there, how do you determine how, and I don't imagine you're going for a particular length, like you're thinking beforehand, I want this one to be this length, but how do you determine what the process is that gets you the length you eventually get?
Yeah, it's a good question. I made a previous film about bridges along a single river, and that was each bridge was separated by 2 seconds of black screen, and so each bridge I felt like a scene in itself, and the black approximated the distance between them. But this was different. I knew it was going to be different, and so I shot each stone for more or less the same length, which is, I don't know, between 5 and 7 minutes, because I knew that would give me enough to decide from the editing. And although I said there was 108 bunkers originally, there are now 70 or so stones left. I don't know, there are conflicting reasons as to why nearly 30 stones, or well, more than 30 stones have disappeared in the decades since they were first constructed. But I knew that was going to be a lot, at least 70 stones in the film. I knew I was going to spend probably a minute or so at each. And so the first cut I did was more or less 73 minutes. I trimmed it by 10 because brevity is the key I felt in a film like this.
Yeah, we're going to open it up to questions. Then we have one here from Matthew Turner.
When that cat went past, were you like,
Yes.
Hi, there's several instances when you film, and as I say, you set up a structure, and there are all different kinds of reasons as to why you can't spend all day there. And so it's kind of this tension between structure on the one hand and absolute serendipity and coincidence on the other, and you kind of try to control one so that those kinds of moments happen.
Were you disappointed that the cat didn't stop and redeem itself on the market? I thought that would have been genius if the cat had done that.
I mean,
we use it as a scratching post?
Oh, yeah.
yeah. Now there's loads that I actually felt more precious about when it came to editing. And I thought, oh, that's got to be in there, and that's got to be in there because they give the film so much character. And then just through the edits, you know, things kind of disappear. And then there's like kind of, you know, it's weird that there's a screening in a section called Ghosts and Apparitions, which wasn't, you know, that title of the program pre-existed this film, but it, you know, there's a lot of ghosts and apparitions in this film just because of the dissolve. There's also a fly in the room that I don't know if you noticed, landing on the lens every so often, which I felt gave it a bit of, again, serendipity and nice, uncontrollable atmosphere.
Yes.
So obviously it is a circuit. I don't know if you actually displayed it as a circuit. If you did, how did you choose your starting stone? Was there any logic to that, or was it just the nearest one?
Really good question. Thank you. It is a circuit, so the final stone that we see is also the first stone that we see, although it's different because in order to make sure that each stone retains the same place on screen, between when I'm editing it, I had to ever so slightly change the image so that each stone, so I'm shooting sort of, you know, far back enough that I'm able to manipulate it. And you know, inevitably, the annoying thing is some stones are shorter than others, even though they're not meant to be. Some stones, as a result, appear on screen like fatter than others. So when we arrive back to the stone that the film begins with, it has changed. So it's the same scene, but it's not the same scene. It's the same scene that I recorded, but it's slightly different. There's something metaphorical, I think, to be said there in terms of when you complete the circuit, you know, you come back to square one, but I feel like you may have changed as the walker, and hopefully as a viewer, there's also some kind of transformation taking place. But I didn't begin the walk where the film begins. So the film begins in Golovets, which is a hill southeast of the city centre, and I deliberately chose that space because the density of the trees, I wanted the first passage or sequence or several minutes of the film to feel like a bit of an aesthetic puzzle or game, and for the audience to sort of try to enter a process of trying to decode it, like what the hell is happening here? Am I seeing it dissolve? Because I was interested in the idea of persistence of an image combined with duration and the effect of that combination, so that when a change does happen, although that change has taken place gradually by a dissolve, which is a cinematic technique, as soon as you notice that the change is made, you can't go back to confirm it. And even if you could, through like, you know, DVD software or whatever, or if it was online, you can't rewatch it with the same ignorance because you're watching it with an informed perspective. So yeah, I deliberately chose Golovets because of that, and also because that was where the bunkers were most densely packed during the occupation.
So what you're saying is what we saw was not chronological order.
The stones are in chronological order, and the film follows that sequence, but I meet the trail, and I think 2/3 of the way through the film.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, that's where I begin, because Golovets is a difficult place to get to, so you wouldn't actually start the trail there,
I see.
because when you come full circle,
Yeah.
you've still got another 5-7 miles to get back into the city from there.
Okay. Yes, this gentleman over here.
So I suppose this is not really such a question about performance, but more about sort of thematic sort of things. Obviously, we've seen two films which have sort of monuments to, you know, sort of sites of conscience and stuff, but they're very, very different. And with the Laibach one, the monument itself is much more sort of understated in a way that the public sort of engage with it throughout everyday life. And obviously that comes through the form of the film with the cyclists, the train and the cats and all that. Do you think that is a really important thing in terms of monuments, of sites of conscience and places like this, in that the public can interact with them, or moreover forget that they're completely because they become part of the surroundings, as opposed to having, for instance, armed guards, statues, and allowing people to take photos, as we saw in
Yeah, I mean, I like the idea of an anti-fascist monument being a series of monuments. I think there's a collectivity there to be said. In sort of subverting and rejecting the sort of totalitarian position of that territory in the first place, upon that territory. But I, you know, the interesting thing about this is that when you're in Ljubljana and you tell people you do walk, they tend to know it, and you know, they're bemused by the fact that you've done it once, never mind you're returning, you're getting a plane there to do it again and again, and then you're going to make a film about it. It's much more understated, as you said, and it's integrated into everyday life. You know, it sort of skirts through residential areas, industrial areas, forested areas, parkland. It is itself a park. And over the decades, you know, Ljubljana is a very green city, and I think that comes across in the film, which just inevitably, by making a film about it, you know, there's certain statistics that they are very proud about in terms of how they've added to Vlasto Kopac's design, you know, with regard to however many thousand trees have been planted along it. So people use it every day and interact with it without it necessarily being a site of pilgrimage, which I think is important. Yeah.
I want to ask a question about opacity and legibility. We do not hold the audience's hand in any way, shape, or form when it comes to providing any contextualizing on-screen text. What's your
Imagine if there wasn't a Q&A, you'd just be all going wrong. What was on? It still might be, I don't know. Yeah, it's a good question, because this is one of 3 films I produced as part of a PhD thesis around a practice of walking and film, and how the two might be linked by questions of structure, repetition, duration. One of the tensions is always between how much context you give in the film and how much you leave the context to something that's after. And I think, like, you know, I reject like the fact that, or the notion that it's more pure and cinematic if there's no context. I don't think that's true. but I think that's maybe the presumption that, you know, I don't want to give context because it would feel like a Wikipedia footnote at the end or whatever. I did think of including something probably at the end of the film that kind of, you know, gives sort of some context, but then the stones themselves don't give any context other than the fact that they're engraved with barbed wire and the years 1942 to 1945, which is when the occupation took place. So I felt like the stones in themselves invite and hope, like, pique interest, and hopefully the film does on those kinds of terms too.
Yes, up front, and then I'll get to you, Matthew.
I noticed on one of the stones that there was a star, just on one of the stones. I just thought you could talk a bit more about that.
Yeah, just one, and there's actually two, but the second stone that has a star and a more sort of decorative design couldn't be in the film because it's about 2 meters higher than all of the others, and I didn't want to privilege that and promote it as having any greater importance along the walk, although for reasons that on the walk itself, it obviously the position in the city that it has, I think it's privileged. But I actually don't know why that stone in particular has a star, but I know that it's a very, very residential area that it's in, and you'll have noted that there's 2 seats. A lot of the stones have 2 seats, but because that's a particularly residential area, it feels like, and there's cushions on the seats as well, and they're beaten up, the cushions. It feels like people sit on them every day. So maybe it has something to do with that.
Assuming the extremely precise framing with each stone is something that happens in the edit, is it in the digital manipulation and stuff, rather than you standing there and kind of very carefully exactly matching up just?
No, it did. So I shot the first stone from a distance that I felt was what I needed to combat the fact that there's variables from one stone to the next. And I marked the frame as to where the stone should be with acetate over the viewfinder. So I sort of knew where each stone should be. Annoyingly, I think the third stone I shot was too close, and so those are the kind of contingencies that you can never really predict. So that stone couldn't be in the film because it was going to be visibly different.
I want to come back to the question of duration. And when you're editing, you can't know what an audience is going to feel. So you're editing for yourself, I suppose, first and foremost. What feeling are you going for when you're editing in terms of the length that you decide that you're happy with?
It's true. I feel like I do make films primarily for myself, which is why not many people have seen the films that I make. I guess it's an experience. I'm trying to achieve a temporality or a temporal mode, which is merely different to the temporality that prevails in everyday life. Which
everyday cinema.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to say that speed or duration is in itself like a site of resistance or opposition to, for instance, capitalism, because that would merely perpetuate, ableist logics of capitalism, whereby, people walking is actually a very privileged thing. To go to a different country and to walk in that locale is something that a lot of people aren't able to do, and something that a lot of people wouldn't feel comfortable doing for various reasons. So I say all of that because the attempt is merely to give time and an experience in which the mind can drift, in which it has a space in which to feel things. The whole the way in which like slow cinema as a genre was fetishized because it was taken as to be intrinsically better than narrative cinema or commercial cinema at the time at which it emerged. I reject that because slowness isn't in itself a positive value, but it can open up different possibilities, I think. And so it is a kind of a blank film in a way that privileges form, but hopefully by the very precision of the shots and the landscapes that are captured, one is sort of taken to that space cinematically, I guess.
You said that you had to make or were meant to make 3 films as part of your PhD. One was the River Bridges, the film you made before this, and I'm assuming there is a third to come, or
Yeah, it's great. It's 10 minutes long. I was conscious of, so I made a film before this, Lee River Bridges, which is about every bridge encountered along the River Lee between Waltham Abbey and the River Thames in London, East London. And then that was 34 minutes. This is 63. And the third film is in Zagreb, and it's about an installation which can't be encountered, an urban installation across the city of 9. It's a solar system. It's a model of 9 planets designed to scale, and it can't be encountered in the same way. It's not an A to B walk like the river walk, and this is an A to A walk where it's a circle. And the third film's kind of all over the map, all over the place. So I wanted to set myself the challenge of making a film that was about duration without being merely long. So set myself the challenge of trying to convey a sense of distance and a walkable journey, even though I took several buses to shoot it. And set myself the challenge of doing that without it just being 3 hours long. Again, this is a film about walking, but I didn't want to walk with the camera. I set myself the challenge of trying to convey some sense of passage, some physical or mental drift, by keeping the camera still and implying movement between those frames.
when did you get to see the third film?
You sound like my PhD. I've missed the cut-off for all the festivals that I wanted to screen it at, so maybe I'll have to wait until next year.
Well, we look forward to it. Do we have any more questions for Michael? I see a tentative hand there. Come on, be brave.
Questions a bit off topic.
We love off the topic questions, please.
I want to ask, when you make this film, have you worried about like the audience understand or not or something? It's just a bit cliche. Because that's the problem I have currently. I think I want to make a film like only for myself. I want to make it as like as much as I can, or I think I want to make a film to communicate. I want to make a film to want other people to understand me. So like I'm jealous, like you can make that just don't care. For example, maybe I'm not good enough to understand.
I mean, I care deeply.
Sorry.
Yeah. No. It's a really good question. I care deeply about an audience experience, or I should say, I care more than I think I do. So, and that's measured by the nerves that one feels before a film screens. I'm like, oh, people are actually in a room now to see this. I hope they enjoy it. But like when I'm conceptualizing it in my head, I think I'm trying to make it so that I can leave it in a way and complete a narrative in my own head, and to answer some research questions or some curiosities. So that's the primary drive in making the film. But I absolutely care about the experience and the conditions in which the film screened, which is why I think now that it's being screened in a cinema, it might be open, for instance, to a walk in and walk out kind of exhibition installation context. But I think when I first started out, it was important that it's felt and understood in its totality, which is why, not that I had the option, but it's why I perceived it and conceived it to be screened in a cinema context. because the cinema's coded to the point where people can't walk out, not with these anyway. But there's two different forms of understanding, I think you mean, in terms of understanding what the film is about, in terms of where it's shot, what the landscape is that it's engaging with, but also understanding in a kind of more embodied knowledge sense, like experiential sense, and understanding something about it on those terms. I'm not sure if I've.
You don't worry about like maybe audience are not patient enough and they don't want to watch because when I'm like talking about storytelling, we always talk about how to engage audience, how to make it interesting to like audience stay. But maybe this is another sense of art or something.
Yeah, no, it's a good question. I don't worry so much because I feel like if I'm willing to sit through it, somebody else might. And I'm responding to a lot of different artists here that are kind of my influences.
Well, I was going to ask that actually.
I don't discuss my influences, but
well, actually, this is something that that we were kind of asked to in doing Q&As at the festival this year, sort of do. I don't know if anyone else has been doing it, but I have. If someone who has never seen a structural film before has seen this film and they want to know, what other films that they could watch in this vein, who would you recommend that they go to? James Benning, of course.
James Benning, of course, but for me, that's maybe too obvious. Sharon Lockhart made a film called Double Tide about workers on a beach, and it's a single take. There's something about tripod fixed shots that I really like because the stillness calls attention to the movement within the frame, and also suggests a whole world through sound outside of the frame. And it also, by keeping the camera still, the moving image camera still, you're kind of calling attention to the difference between cinema and photography and the continuities between them also. So Sharon Lockhart, I would recommend. And in terms of like contemporary filmmakers, I feel like Ashanti Harris, Scottish filmmaker, made great films, several films last year and the year before, in which the camera is just kind of kept still to contemplate, contemporary landscapes and seascapes, but also thread through voiceover and different techniques and different aesthetic strategies, an investigation into the legacy and the complicated history of that landscape.
Practical question. Why Lubiana Laibach as opposed to Lubiana, and what does Laibach mean?
Lubiana is the Italian word for Ljubljana, and Laibach is the German. So it's Ljubljana twice. And I was anticipating that question actually, and I couldn't answer it in my head, but I decided early on, again, it was a way of, if you have to ask, then it's maybe succeeded in the way it mystifies the landscape. Obviously, a lot of people, i.e. Slovenians, wouldn't have to ask that. And again, it might point to the way in which this contemporary landscape, which is Ljubljana, might be complicated and understood in a way that is contextualized by, firstly, yes, the fascist occupation of that territory, but also through the stones which mark that imposition, the victory of anti-fascism and communism.
Speaking of Slovenians, you intend to screen this film at any festivals in Slovenia, in Ljubljana?
Yeah, I sent it to Ljubljana International Film Festival and didn't get a response, but I know the director of the festival, so maybe I should follow up now that it's had its world premiere. It's such an estimable event as this one. And I have Slovenia for me in Ljubljana as a place of lasting attachment, and I have a lot of close friends there, colleagues who then became, I guess, friends independent of the professional context. 3 of them I thanked at the beginning of the screening. So yeah, I hope that there's at least some kind of screening at maybe the Slovenian Cinematheque in Ljubljana, which is a beautiful cinema. I'd be very proud to show it there.
And if we don't have any more questions for Michael, then I think we can bring this to a close. Michael, I want to thank you again so much for giving us this experience, for taking us literally on this journey.
Thank you, Jonathan. Your questions and Q&A have been absolutely fantastic. I want to thank the festival again for providing a discursive space in which a film like this can be kind of contextualized and unpacked. So thanks to Cynthia and Melanie and the team as well. Thank you, and thanks for the audience for sitting through that action-packed thriller and asking the questions that you did. Thank you so much.
And just a reminder, you can vote, go online and vote for your favorite film of the festival. Vote early, vote often, vote for Lubiana Laibach. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.